you, or just so everyone knows who's in the room. And I'm going to start now. So here we go. So I guess I can start with why we are here. And we are here because the contradictions of capitalism have again come to a head, and it's forcing many of us to carry the weight of this crisis. This moment that we're in is unprecedented. There's mass layoffs, business closure, and the shelter in place orders have unveiled a crisis that has already existed, except it's particular for this time because the inequities that have existed for years at this moment make us all very vulnerable. And instead of it being experienced by just a minority population, it's now a collective experience. And I just want to make sure, like, with that said, it's important to know that um, what we are dealing with, the coronavirus, is a biological thing. It's not man-made, but the system that we are in is a man-made system, and that system is a fiction that can be changed by us and by organizing on the ground. Um, After this moment, things won't be the same, and I don't think that they should be. And this here, what we're doing, is a part of an experiment in world making, you could say. So we're meeting here because, like many of you, I'm sure you're overwhelmed with text-heavy sites and posts that can be hard to decipher. I wish we were doing this in person, but we do what we can. I hope everyone's loved ones are healthy and safe. But these resources are here in case they are not. And again, bear with us because this whole organizing project is uncharted territories, and I'm not the best orator in the world, but I'm very passionate about liberation, not so much about Zoom. But I'll pass it on to Crystal now, or she'll pass it to herself.
Okay, so why did we want to make this resource guide? I saw that there were a lot of terms that were being circulated online around housing, especially during this crisis. Um, and in seeing a lot of the um, terms that were being circulated, and also like different actions, different calls to action. One example of a concern that came up for me was the call for a rent strike alongside an eviction moratorium. And this was of concern to me because I was worried that if people were going to go on rent strike, that it would possibly be lost or like fizzle out amidst an eviction moratorium. And we'll get a little bit more into that further on um, in this meeting. But I also currently I work at a nonprofit. I work in housing. So I wanted to, some of the terms that I saw being circulated, I noticed that there were some confusions around, what is going on right now with housing. And so this guide is meant to be to an attempt to define some of those terms, to differentiate between them, like the different stipulations that they each have, so that people could then make better informed decisions about what they chose to do based on their unique situations. And so I do work at a nonprofit, and that is, a service model. I also I have personally experienced, the shortcomings of a service model. So we really want to emphasize that this is not a service. We are doing this because we are regular people. We are tenants who are being affected by this crisis, like so many people in around the world, especially in this country. And so we wanted to gather the resources that we knew of, and because of my job, having getting to learn a little bit more about the legalities around housing, if I could offer that to people, that I'm glad and willing to do so. And with that said, we are not necessarily experts. So if anybody knows about any resources or they have any updates about anything that we talk about here, please feel free to share. We encourage that. And, again, we're doing this because we are tenants, we are concerned, and we want to make sure that we organize and that others are as well. So we're going to get into doing an overview of this site and guide. We're going to have time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions during this time, please feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end and try to best answer them as best as we can. So now I'm going to pass it on to Rich.
Am I back? Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to go through the guide. And what we're going to do is I want to kind of explain the guide as we envision it to be used, and what the purpose of each section is. Um, so this first section, this what does it mean section, this is essentially the definition section. And like Crystal was saying, at this moment, I feel like there was a lot of terms being used, and even in this moment, I feel like a lot of language has been created or recontextualized that is really confusing. So we thought it would be really important to start with defining some of the major ones. Um, and this first one was, what is a rent strike? And it basically just explains to you what a rent strike is. The second one is, what is rent and mortgage amnesty or holiday? And any of these like bold portions are portions that we are like, make sure like if you're gonna take away something from this definition, it should be these pieces. So like anybody navigating it, like take look at that with some importance. Next is what is the rent and mortgage freeze? And then what is eviction? I think this one is really important because not a lot of people know how an eviction really works. And this is not only just a definition, but even the process of how a landlord can go about evicting you. What is the eviction moratorium? I think this one is very important that we're going to touch on more in depth later, because a lot of people have been hearing this one a lot, and they see it as like kind of like a saving grace, like we're okay. But there are a lot of stipulations with this eviction moratorium, and depending on what city, county, and now there's the state level one, and so you know what is like what trumps what, we're going to go more in detail. So that's the definition section. This second section, the what are my choices section, the way we envision this guide to roll out is kind of like a choose your own path. So if you are affected by the crisis, what you would do is like, these are basically the paths that you would go down. And so if you wanted to join the rent strike, these are the steps that you would take. And with each step, with each choice you make, there is like a form or a letter or a resource that is that you need, that a correlating resource that you would need for this, and you would click on them on this side right here, so everyone knows that they're right there. The second one was, I can't pay my rent and I want to exercise my rights under the eviction moratorium. Like I said, we're going to go into the in-depth a little bit more later, but any of the forms you need are right here. And then this one is the I can't pay my rent and I'm seeking temporary financial assistance, which I think will be used by a lot of people. And this has the letter and the resource list that you would need for that. This section right here, I am undocumented, but what are my housing rights? This is probably the most sparse section of the website. And this website, this guide is a living website. We are going to update it as new information comes along, which I'm sure it will in the coming months, in the coming weeks, maybe even days. And this one is, we had the least amount of information on. And it's sad because I think they, like undocumented people are probably really one of the most vulnerable populations during this. And so this one is broken down. We're hoping to get more information about undocumented people during the situation. If any of you have any information on that, please message us so we can update this. But essentially right now, it's just how they can go about getting financial assistance and what documentation is needed to get assistance. The last section is to create a support network. I'm not going to really go into detail about this, full detail, but I'll just like overview it. We built this basically like a crash course in how to create a network of support. It's framed towards housing, and if you are choosing to strike or to gain some type of support structure around housing, but it can be used for anything. It can be used for creating a support structure about like mental health, a support structure around monetary needs and food needs, anything that you would want. But we based it around some of the principles of mutual aid, as well as the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective has a term called the POD. And the POD is basically a group of people you can call on if like violence or harm or abuse has happened to you, or if you have caused violence or harm or abuse to someone else and are looking for support and taking accountability. And this model is really great for starting support structures around you. And we also used parts of the tenants together tenants union model, how to create a tenants union. So we blended all three of those together and created this like really, you know, time sensitive how to organize your network. So it's broken down into 3 steps. The first step is to organize your network, which is basically to like think of the 3 to 5 people that you can you know right off the bat you can lean on, your neighbors, family, friends, or tenants. Step 2 is like mostly this template that we adapted from the pod network, the pod structure, which you would basically put yourself in the center, and each of the gray circles on the outside would be those initial people you would lean on. And then from that on the outside would be who are they are leaning on. And it's supposed to show you how this like ripple effect of support can go very large, and you can create a large mutual support network. And then step 3 is essentially how to plan a meeting, how to run a meeting, which is going to be really tough during these times, but there are ways to do that. And you can look over that to do that. And yeah, so I'll pass it back to Crystal now. Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen really quick. Mhm. This takes a little bit.
Oh, I gotta stop sharing.
Oh, I just stopped yours. Okay, so now we're gonna get into breaking some things down um, that are highlighted in the site, and the first one is what is the eviction moratorium? So basically, an eviction moratorium is a temporary stop to evictions. In this case, it's a temporary stop to evictions for tenants who have been affected by coronavirus. And as of March 17th, the city of San Jose enacted an eviction moratorium. And as of Friday, Governor Newsom enacted a statewide California moratorium. Oh, sorry, Rich just told me you could see my notes. Okay, can you share the screen for me?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, y'all. It's funny because we practice this like hella times, and so can you go down to eviction moratorium, please? Thank you. Okay, so as of Friday, Governor Newsom passed the California statewide eviction moratorium that would be in effect until May 31st. Um, this is good in the sense that, you know, now that it's statewide, there were still counties and cities that didn't have a moratorium in place, and so I think, in my eyes, that is one positive. However, there are still a lot of shortcomings with this moratorium. Um, and under the statewide moratorium, tenants have to provide a written notice to their landlord within the first 7 days. So basically, the first week of the month, letting their landlord know that they won't be able to pay rent, and also provide their landlord with that documentation. So I'm going to move into Santa Clara County specific things about the moratorium now. And so, as I mentioned previously, we already had a moratorium that was enacted here for in San Jose, and then the newest update for Santa Clara County extended that eviction moratorium to May 31st. In Santa Clara County specifically, there is a 120-day grace period after the moratorium that tenants have to pay back their rent. This is something that is specific to Santa Clara County. I'm not sure if there are other counties that also have a grace period, but this is not something that is a part of the statewide moratorium. So, statewide moratorium doesn't have anything about a grace period. That is up to every local county, city to decide that. So again, this is something that it seems positive, but I think more than anything, it gives the illusion of relief because as soon as June 1st hits, from June 1st to September, people are going to have to pay back what they didn't pay during the shelter in place, which, as we all know, is going to be really difficult. I think it's unreasonable. Um, and there are still other ways that this falls short, and they're very important to know about this moratorium. The first one is that this is only for tenants who have been impacted by coronavirus. This impact can be because you were sick and you had to miss work, or your hours were reduced, or your work was shut down completely, or your kid's school was closed down, you didn't have childcare, so you couldn't go to work. But basically, this corona virus impact has to directly impact your income, and you have to be able to provide documentation to prove that. So even if you have been impacted but you don't have documentation, unfortunately, this moratorium is not going to work in your favor. Everything here has to be documented. So if you find yourself in a situation where you think the moratorium could apply to you, please remember and let your family and friends know that they have to provide documentation. So another thing that is important about this to know is that this does not apply to any eviction that was already in place before the shelter in place. So let's say that somebody got an eviction notice on March 1st, which was before shelter in place. That eviction notice is it like continues to be to apply to that person. Like, this moratorium does not protect that person. Um, and I also think that there are some possible loopholes with this moratorium that landlords could potentially find. For example, in San Jose, a landlord has to be able to prove that, or have a just cause to evict a tenant. And there are 13 just causes. You can find them on the city's website. But some notable ones are non-payment of rent, lease violations, troublesome behavior, and unapproved subtenants. So although this moratorium is applies to those who cannot pay their rent because they have been impacted by coronavirus, there is nothing that says that a landlord can't evict you if they deem you to have troublesome behavior. Another thing that I see is as really concerning is that there are a lot of people who rent rooms where the landlord is not aware that they are tenants there. This would be considered an unapproved subtenant. So even if that person, this unapproved subtenant, were to be able to provide documentation that they were affected by coronavirus, because their landlord doesn't know that they are tenants there and they don't have a formal contract, then that would also that would potentially put that person at risk. So again, these protections come for people who are formal tenants, who are approved by their landlords, and you have to have documentation proving your impact by coronavirus. Rich, can you move down to what are my choices? Okay, so now I'm gonna go to the I can't pay my rent and I want to exercise my rights under the moratorium. Here you can find some more information about the eviction moratorium here. Can you go down a little lower, please? And you can also find some important action steps if you are a tenant and the moratorium applies to you. Um, the first link that you'll see here is the reduced income form. This is something that is provided by the city. You would fill it out. At the bottom, there is also like a checklist of the kind of documentation that you can provide. Again, like I mentioned, documentation here is super important. So the more documentation that you have, I would say the better, because um, even if a landlord tries to harass you and, you know, take you to court after the shelter in place, like, you need to be able to provide this documentation so to fight your landlord and have the moratorium applied to you. Can you go back to the tenants, please? Okay, and so you will also find the COVID-19 eviction notice. This is something that that shows what the landlord responsibility is here to tenants. Um, and it also has a link to a list of resources that landlords are required to provide their tenants. It also has an overview of the tenant responsibility, and here you can also find like the kinds of examples of COVID-19 impacts and the kinds of appropriate documentation that you could provide. Um, and then back to the site. And so you also have to make sure that you provide your landlord with some kind of letter that you in writing. Like, I encourage people to talk to their landlords and let them know if they can't pay rent and they are on a formal lease, they know that they can, you know, document or provide documentation that they've been impacted. Let your landlord know. But you also have to put it in writing. And if you go down a little bit lower on the site, you will find a sample landlord letter. You can use this template. You would fill out the blank fields, and you could email or, you know, give this to your landlord. So from here, I'm going to move to back on the SJ Tenant site to this section here that says I can't pay my rent and I'm seeking temporary financial assistance. So there are several agencies, organizations throughout the county that do provide temporary financial assistance. Some of the more notable ones are Sacred Heart, Salvation Army, but there on the side, you can find a more extensive resource list. This resource list doesn't include every single organization in the county that does provide financial resources, but it does show some of the more well-known organizations. So some maybe you might have heard that last Monday, Sacred Heart announced that they were going to be able to provide financial assistance for people who were affected by coronavirus. And something a little bit different about this program, at least for Sacred Heart or other organizations that are a part of the homeless prevention system, is that this financial assistance would go directly to people. And it would just be like money to people. Whereas usually financial assistance has come in the form of like specifically for rent or specifically for utilities. But it wasn't even 2 days and they had over 1,600 applicants. And so right now they're temporarily closed for applications. If you go to the Sacred Heart website, they do have an interest list for when they open up again, but right now they are temporarily closed. And I share this because I want to I think it's important to note the reality that, like, while there are organizations throughout the county that are providing temporary financial assistance, these funds are not infinite, and it's also not enough to help every single person who has been impacted by this. And you know, a reality is that not everybody is going to get financially assisted, and if they do, it might not be for all of your rent, or it might not be enough to cover all of the other things that you need. So I am encouraging people to, you know, if the moratorium applies to them, to make sure again that they are collecting as much documentation as they can. Um, Another thing about the temporary financial assistance is that organizations are also asking for that documentation. It's documentation that is very similar to what the county is asking for to prove that the moratorium applies to you. So you do have to provide pay stubs. You have to provide proof that you have been affected. It could be a letter from an employer. And so again, during this time, I encourage everyone to communicate with their landlords, which is not an easy thing to do. It's something that I have to do often at work, and even though it's not my personal landlord, it's not something that is pleasant and it's not easy. So I understand that, like our relationships with our landlords are basically built around us paying them. So if we have to talk to them about not being able to provide the rent, I understand that that's a really nerve-wracking conversation. But I want to like remind everybody that you're not in this alone, that a lot of people are in a very similar situation as you if you aren't able to pay rent. And remember that you do have rights as a tenant, especially if you are on a formal contract with your landlord and you have been affected. So although that conversation is difficult, like I encourage everyone to find the courage and strength. And if you need help in um you're not really sure how to navigate that situation or that conversation, you can also reach out, you know uh and we can try to like give some tips. But yes, communication right now is really important. So we're going to keep moving through the site, and I'm going to pass it back to Rich.
Hello? Okay, I'm back. Okay. So I'm going to go over the rent strike. And the rent strike this is kind of convoluted. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. But if you feel like I'm maybe like like losing you, we can ask questions, and it might be easier for me to answer questions than like try and backtrack in the middle of it. But okay. So I guess the best place to start with the rent strike is to define what a rent strike is and what it is not. So what a rent strike is well, historically, rent strikes have been used as a legal tactic to get needs met, like material needs met, your living condition needs met. And what you would do was you would protest by withholding your rent. And you wouldn't do that alone. You would protest by organizing with other tenants who have the same landlord, or organizing with a larger citywide tenants union. And what it is not is, I think, it really important in this situation is if you do not pay your rent, it is not a rent strike, because a rent strike is a protest. A strike is a protest, and with a protest comes inherent risks. And those risks could be higher for certain people, and we want to be very careful about that. So we want everyone to know the risks going into this. Um, some of the risks are possible eviction, it could affect your credit, and so on. Um, so I guess knowing how a strike has been used historically, like how is a strike applied now in this current situation? And a rent strike in this moment differs from the traditional rent strike because what we are protesting against is much larger. We are protesting by withholding our rent, which forces the landlords to not pay their mortgage, which affects the banks. So what we're doing is we're forcing the hand of the state to respond to the crisis accordingly. And we are doing this also here alongside lobbying representatives, because I think we think that we should be hitting this from all sides. And what we are doing specifically, I guess why we did it is because there was a lot of things floating around about calling for a rent strike without any support. And we feared that people would sporadically or individually strike without a larger support network. And say like one person is striking on the east side and one person is striking on the south side. And like, even if there's like a bunch of different people, if they are not organized as a unit, they are invisibilized, and the landlord could just mow them over and no one would know. And we don't want that. So the SJ Tenants site, because there is no SJ Tenants union or a large citywide coalition from which this strike is springing out of, we built a space that could be used as a conduit for support, a place where a support network that people could organize through. And moving forward with the crisis, we don't really know what's going to happen. And you may not strike this month, but you might strike in the following month. And like I said, SJ Tenants, the site, the guide is a hub for resources around the crisis. And so we saw to it that there was a response to all the possible choices. The site is for all tenants because we are all tenants, whether we are striking or not. We don't want to leave anybody behind. So I want to just walk through the choice if you want to join the strike. So if you want to join the strike, like we said, strikes are only as effective if they are organized. It is really imperative that you start to organize now if you're choosing to, even just on a small network, like we said, and then you can add your small network to the larger network, because if we are going to win, we are going to win as a group. And I think it's really highlighted at this moment that, especially in the way that other countries have been dealing with the ongoing crisis, that our government is not doing that, and we're going to have to rely on each other. So that's why the support network that we had at the beginning is really important to start doing. But if you want to choose a strike, you're going to go to the rent strike page, which we built with Serve the People right here. Hopefully you can see it. So the rent strike page, I'm just gonna go down to the demands. I'm just gonna read the relief for the house tenants. Because it's a protest, we have demands, and these are our demands. The demands are unconditional eviction moratorium for the duration of the crisis, including the post-pandemic recovery period. We demand rent and mortgage amnesty, which means no rent due and no back rent for the duration of the crisis. Because even after the crisis ends, there is going to be a large period of time where, it's not just rent, there are large amounts of debt that are going to be accrued during this time. And this one is really important, the anti-harassment measures prohibiting all forms of harassment and retaliation against tenants by landlords. And this will affect, like we said, all tenants, because landlords don't always follow the rules. So if you want to strike, you're going to go to the bottom of the page. And here, if you want to sign the petition in support of, or you are striking, either one, you would sign here. And this is basically the lobbying to the state representatives. And then if you are choosing to strike and you want to be connected to others who are striking to give or gain support, you would sign this rent strike form here. And this form, essentially, we're collecting people's contacts to mobilize support when and if it is needed. So I think, yeah, that is it. And right here, you're gonna have to notify your landlord. And like Crystal said, it's probably gonna be one of the hardest parts, I think. But yeah, it's going to be hard, but this is, you have to do this. And the landlord letter is right here, and we have a template letter. And the template letter also comes with right here an outreach letter that you can give to neighbors. I think one of the things also to recognize is usually rent strikes have a long arc of planning. And this is, since, like we said, this is an unprecedented time where everything was pushed on us really quickly. So this was pushed together really fast. But I still think that it is imperative that we organize around this issue. And I think that's it for that. Yes. Yeah, did you have anything else at the end of that? Because if not, we can move towards questions now, right? Okay. Take a breath.
So I'm gonna unmute myself and hope that there isn't too much of an echo. But okay, so one of the first questions that I saw was about, are the courts still processing evictions? And Liz answered this. Thank you, Liz. She says civil courts are currently closed and eviction proceedings are on hold until reopened. Yeah, so like I had mentioned earlier, like if somebody has had an eviction that was already in process, because because closes because courts are temporarily closed, that also brings that eviction to a halt. But that person wouldn't, because it was already started, they wouldn't be protected under the moratorium. So because the courts are closed, they're not moving through with evictions in the same way. But it's kind of just like everything is like pushed back. um, let's see, what is the next one? Would it be effective to join a strike if your lease is with a leasing company that has properties nationwide, like Prometheus and Avalon? Um, I think that if you are a tenant at with a leasing company like this, it could be very effective, especially if you are in a larger complex and you begin to organize with your neighbors. I think that is one of like the most effective ways that you can rent strike. So I would say yes. Um, the next question is it a bad idea to rent strike to hurt the banks if you live in a tax credit affordable housing? It seems that a lot of their funding is from public agencies. Are we trying to hurt those too? The good thing about corporate leasing companies is that they are the kind of companies we want to hurt, not the elderly couple who owns a house they rent. Um, so there's, I guess, maybe like a couple questions in there. Um, if you can't pay your rent and you live in an affordable housing complex, again, usually they are larger complexes. If you have neighbors there that also can't pay their rent and are interested in striking, I I would say that it is not a bad idea. And the question about, like, who are we trying to hurt? I think I would rethink, instead of like who are we trying to hurt, thinking about like the chain of effect that is present here, and the reality is that a lot of tenants aren't going to have the income to pay their rent, and so it's going to affect everybody. And it would affect the affordable housing complex. And because California tax credit housing complexes are they do receive public funding, I think that if they were to feel that impact, it could potentially you know be something that would work in favor for tenants. Do you want to answer any part of that question?
No, you nailed it.
Okay.
No.
And then the part about the elderly couple who owns a house they rent, again, is kind of similar to what I answered previously. I think, the elderly couple is also going to be impacted because they probably have to, they might have to pay property taxes. Or so I think instead of thinking about, who do we want to hurt, thinking about this as like a collective issue and a collective crisis that all of us are impacted by. And, if we as tenants can't provide rent, that is because of a larger issue. And the state needs to act accordingly to make sure that we as tenants and as citizens get the kind of like security net and relief that we need.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing is making sure we're not like separating, like the landlords are different, but landlords are also tenants. And we're trying to really show that like you said, like it is the larger issue, that they are also affected, and they, underneath the larger systems and larger mechanisms, are made vulnerable by this situation as well.
Okay, so next question is, I'm not sure how to contact or receive signatures from my fellow tenants in my apartment unit since I don't have a printer and I don't want to violate social distancing. Would I be able to notify my landlord as one person, even without signatures from other tenants? Yes, you could notify your landlord as one person, but I would still, if you do know your neighbors, I would still encourage you to get in contact with them. And there are ways to electronically, sign documents. Um, you can, there's a lot of ways that you can do it. Like you could do a screenshot of the letter, and then like if you have a phone, you can on an edit. That's like a really like rudimentary way, I think, of like you can edit to then just like mark up the picture and write in a signature. But there's also other apps like I think DocuSign has like a free option. Were you gonna add something to that?
No, I was going to say, yeah, Lauren responded to in the text, and
Oh.
yeah, I think it's important that you do it. And Lauren had said handwritten notes, and yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, I think um, a good strategy is even to like print out support notes and leave them on your neighbors, like, and with a number, like, for they can hit you up, and you guys can link up and do some type of I mean, like phone chat, and then into like, yeah, like scanning a PDF or using DocuSign or something. I hope there's not like a crazy echo right now too. If there is, I'm sorry. Other questions? How do I sign the petition as a supporter? So far, I can pay my rent and rent a room from friends in a room. If you want to sign the petition as a supporter, that we are sending as like a lobbying effort, maybe I can show you the link. It's right here on the site. The rent strike demands. And the bottom is right here.
Oh, and Daniel also added it to the chat box.
Hell
So
yeah.
there's a direct link. Thank you for doing that.
Shout out, Daniel.
So there's a question here also. If I am able to pay a partial payment, should I do it? This is, I don't want to answer this for you because I think this, you have to look at your situation and like how Rich mentioned, there are risks to, to striking. So if you are able to pay a partial payment, but you don't have all of it, do you want to exercise your rights under the moratorium and provide documentation to your landlord? Let them know that you have been affected, you only have a part of it. That's one thing you could do. If you want to join the strike effort, then, providing your landlord with that other letter stating that you are going to be striking because you have been affected and, you are demanding the state to respond accordingly. But I really think that, this is something that you have to come to on your own and look at your situation, see what the risks are. Also, if you have a partial payment, but like, what is your income like right now? Can you depend on your income for next month? So even if you can provide a partial payment, but you can't depend on your income for next month, is this possibly going to take away from money that you might need in a few weeks? So again, and thank you for offering that question, because that is also a reason why we made this guide, is so that people could, learn a little bit more about what the options are, and that you could weigh things out for yourself and decide with a better informed decision. Okay, so
This question: our building has 100 units, 5 floors, and I don't have anyone's phone numbers. I am high risk and have had a slight fever, so I don't think it's a good idea to run around the building. I don't know many of the non-drug dealer tenants, and the last tenant union leader told people things about me that weren't true. I'm not sure what option I would see here. Let me see.
I think this is also one that I don't know if I can answer this for you. And
Yeah, this is hard. I mean, and also it's well, looking at this, I really don't know how to respond to this. I'm wondering if anyone else in the chat has a good response, because that is a lot of units, and if it seems like a lot of people in this unit are going to be highly affected by this crisis, and it would be really smart to organize that building. I'm trying to think of how you could even contact these people. Tenant union leader. What, and the tenant union leader in quotes, was this an actual tenant union leader, or is this a person who was like living in the building?
yeah, so I would say that, if you are interested in whatever, whether it's things from experience that you know about your neighbors, or maybe your own biases or assumptions, or whatever, is existing between you and your neighbors, I think you have to weigh out for yourself if you want to organize with them. And this might be a time where you put those things aside. If not, then, I think it kind of makes it clear what your options are.
Yeah, I think we have your email, so maybe we can like continue this conversation outside of the chat, and we can like troubleshoot some options, especially maybe if there's other context you have. We can send this tenant leader a message from SJ Tenants as opposed to a singular person. But yeah, like I said, after this chat, I have your email from the RSVP list, and I can message you, and we can see what we can do.
Okay, so next question, and thank you everyone who's also offering ideas and brainstorming. The next question is, are there existing communities you know of that have already begun the unionizing process to strike? From what I know of, I don't know of any tenants unions here.
No, in San Jose, no. There are tenants unions in San Francisco and in Oakland that have existed for a while. I'm hoping we can reach out to them for support moving forward. I'm in contact with a few of them. There's a lot, and there's a lot of newer like rent strike pages that have moved, that have come online, but they're not actually like organizing a strike as much as they are promoting a strike. So yeah, there are a few working towards tenant strikes. I know Station 40 in San Francisco is publicizing their rent strike, and we are in contact with a few of them. Hope that answers the question. Station 40 does rock. Okay, is there another question?
Not that I can see.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I hope that was informative. And yeah, I think it's important to, yeah, like reiterate that we are like just ordinary workers. We're like learning as we go along. This is like super crash course for us. And I think just from history of organizing and work that we've done, we happen to have a lot of resources and information to share, and we decided to share. But we really want to grow a larger network. So make sure to sign up. Either the letter petition, send us an email, or sign the rent strike form because people are going to need support moving forward. It's not going to get better anytime soon. I mean, things are going really bad, and we're like a week and a half in. So, what does Jim Jordan say? We are the ones we've been waiting for, and this is our time to organize. Okay.
Yeah. So, yes, feel free to reach out at housing at siliconvalleydebug.org. I will say that the rent strike form that is on Serve the People's Medium page is, especially if you are, interested in joining the rent strike effort and you want support, I would say that that is one of the most effective places to put your information, because from there we are going to try to make a contact list, and so that you can give and get support if you need people present. I know that that's hard to think about in this time of distancing, but whatever your need may be that that comes up. So I do encourage the rent strike form. Patrick says there are a number of tenants organizations in San Jose. Affordable Housing Network, which means the Somos Mayfair, is a great place to meet people organizing tenants.
Not in person though, right now. It says not in person though currently. Okay, I'm gonna eat some food. Happy everyone came. I hope everyone has a good night and take care of each other and stay in touch.
Yeah. Thanks for being present. We appreciate it and hope to talk to you all soon in some way. Bye. Have a good night.